Wagwan. I am aware that a lot of you may be quite shocked with the title of the video, especially given the fact on which character my profile image on YouTube is based on, what my intro is based on, and as some of you may have guessed, who is my favorite GTA character, let alone the fact how beloved amongst the GTA fans Little Jacob is. However, when I was making the video on all gang relations in GTA 4 and ELFC, I could not resist my suspicions while analysing the mission The Snowstorm, in which Michelle is exposed to be a government spy. But ever since that moment, I've started to wonder that perhaps there wasn't just a spy, but two of them. And the best part is that this whole theory doesn't really undermine Jacob's position as Niko's friend, but I'll explain why towards the end. First, we need to understand where my theory even came from. So let me tell you what made me so suspicious about Little Jacob. See, let's start with the fact that the mission in question's genesis is that Elizabeta Torres got robbed by people to whom she was introduced to by Jacob. Not only that, but she also said that it's because of Jacob, all those people, that the police attention was drawn to her. So that alone is a serious ground for suspicion. Of course, when we play the game and we hear Jacob very definitely denying these accusations, we immediately believe it because he's our good and loyal friend who additionally saved our ass from the Russians not that long ago. Add to that we got distracted by his Rasta ranting, or we barely even understand it, and many players would partially forget what's actually going on. But if we think about the situation and look for clues in other places as well, we'll see that this is not the only part that feels off. And we'll get to those in a bit. But first of all, the police attention that Lizzie was talking about must have come from somewhere, cause she went bullshitting. Ever since that mission, Liz faced plenty of heat. It's best shown by a state in the next mission for her, where she killed Manny and his cameraman out of anxiety, and ever since that mission she was going on and on about the feds closing down on her. Not without reason too, because as we know, she did indeed get locked up eventually. So the main suspects as to why that happened are Jacob and the Spanish Lords members he introduced to her, who later stole a coke. Even if it was Jacob's fault, that doesn't immediately mean that he was a spy. He could have been just not careful enough and been the one spied on, unintentionally giving the feds a glimpse into Elizabeta's business. So let's look further for more clues, but let's stay in the same mission for now. Just coincidentally, in the same mission, Michelle, so Niko's girlfriend at the time, turned out to be an IAA spy, whose task was to watch Niko's actions in order to get enough dirt on him so then her agency could coerce Bellic into working for him, threatening to expose his crimes to the FIB if he rejected to. Before the meeting happens, Niko is sent by Lizzie to retrieve the drugs for her, whilst Jacob was doing a research with an objective to find out where the heat come from. The two stay in touch throughout the mission, each informing the other of their progress. The thing that furthered my suspicions was that Jacob was very unspecific in his phone calls. During the first one, he just says that he is getting closer to find out where the heat come from and that he has to speak to one more person.
I've got this stuff. You know where the heat is coming from?
I think I'm getting closer now. But there's one more cat me have to speak to.
Shit! Speaking of fucking cops, I think I have company. I gotta go.
No concrete information, he might have just as well made that up on the spot. The other phone call gives a similar vibe.
I lost the heat. Where are you?
Change point. I'm with some buck and say no I. Get here now, Niko. This be some strange shit.
Jacob told Niko to come to Chase Point to meet him and an authority figure who claimed that they knew Jacob. Now the thing that I couldn't unsee was Michelle's behavior when Niko arrived.
Hey, Niko. Hey, Jacob.
She greeted Jacob as if he were her good friend. Furthermore, what was she even greeting him for? From the previous phone call conversation, it is clear that Jacob had already spoken to her, as she told him that she knew him and to call Niko. Also, notice that she weren't scared of exposing herself in front of Jacob too. So what does that all imply? Well, that Jacob and Michelle knew each other well, and in this case, they were colleagues. Their mutual objective would have been to bring down Elizabeta Torres. They both were good fits for that job. Michelle had connections with Elizabeta via her acquaintance with Mallory. Jacob, on the other hand, was Roman Bellic's friend, who was in turn Mallory's close friend and was in a direct alliance with Torres' gang, as he was also a gangster himself. And yeah, being a gangster and a government spy doesn't mix well at first glance, but here's how I see it. I think that Jacob may have been a similar case to Niko. On the LCPD file and a promotional poster, it is said that he was wanted by the police for gun trade. My guess is that he got caught eventually, but since he was a smart brother and had the aforementioned connections with Elizabeta Torres, who was at the time the IAA's target, he was instead offered to work for the IAA and help them bring down Liz in exchange for freedom. He was teamed up with Michelle to get close to Niko Bellic. Why Niko? Well, it all adds up. We know from the conversation in Jamaican Heat mission that Jacob knew all about Niko before he even arrived at Liberty City from Roman.
Yo, Niko, the one man Roman been talking about all this time. Cousin Niko, gonna help Roman take over the world and things.
That's probably why Bernard the ULP contact knew so much about Niko's past in the mission wrong is right. Knowing his military past full of violence, his illegal status, and that he was connected to gangsters via Roman and Mallory, they made a bet that he would probably get involved in the shady stuff sooner or later. As we know from the story, they would have been dead right. And add to that they may have specifically targeted the immigrants who'd arrived on the Platypus ship. After all, who knows if it weren't Niko who unintentionally brought the heat down on Faustin. Niko worked for many gangs throughout the story. Badman's crew via Little Jacob, Faustin's gang, Torres' gang, and later also McCreary's crew and Pegorino's Mafia. And of course also Playboy X, John Gravelli. Out of all these, only Badman and Jacob, Gravelli, and Playboy got out unharmed. And Gravelli was also allied with the ULP contact. Faustin and Dimitri eventually had their phones tapped. Torres ended up in jail. McCreary's crew lost their leader due to the feds, and Pegorino had papers served, suspected his capo to be a snitch, and found his bodyguard to have turned states. And sure, Badman's crew was small time, so maybe the feds didn't bother too much to lock him up. But that's just another odd fact that adds to the flames, and that's far from over yet. Anyway, going back to what my theory implies, Jacob could have simply been a spy who had as a task to collect evidence on Elizabeta Torres, and he may have been trying to do it via Niko. Notice how he was the one to call Niko right after he'd done his first job for Lizzie, warning him not to get on the wrong side of her.
Wagwan, my brethren. Been chilling with Elizabeta Torres.
She pays good, man. You know her?
Yeah, man, I know her, Niko. Even Batman scared of that girl there.
Should I not be doing business with her?
Nah, man, she's a real good businesswoman, you know, sir. Just don't get on her wrong side, see? Later on, me call you.
Niko gaining reputation in Lizzie's eyes was beneficial for him, since he could find out what Liz was up to via following Niko's actions. Another major clue is the mission Paper Trail. Niko, who had already been coerced into working for the IAA, got asked to shoot down a helicopter carrying a person funding terrorists. It was a two-man job, and to Niko's surprise, Bernard the ULP contact said that Jacob was going to be the one to help him, openly refusing to explain why.
Bellic, we need you. Now. The chopper is prepped and waiting off Grummer Road in Northwood. Your sometime accomplice Jacob is there. He's riding shotgun on this one.
Jacob? The Rasta?
Don't ask unnecessary questions. I want you to take out this guy's chopper.
The sole presence of Jacob in this mission is a big question mark. On one hand, it seems logical, Niko is our worker, he needs backup, let's involve someone whom he trusts to help him with a job. You know, same logic as to why Trevor and Franklin were involved in the work for Steve Ames by Dave Norton in GTA 5. But the difference is there. Trevor was a professional robber and a trained pilot, while Franklin proved himself by partaking in the jewelry store heist alongside a legendary bank robber in the shape of Michael. Dave knew that he weren't hiring amateurs, while Jacob was a small-time gangster high on weed 90% of his life. And they needed him to just casually shoot down a moving helicopter from another moving helicopter with a rocket launcher. That ain't no simple job. They had to be sure he'd handle it. So that means he had been working for them earlier already. And that isn't just my speculation, it's a fact. He admits it himself. He said in the mission that he's tired of working for the feds, which implies this was far from his first job.
I'm done with that blood clot soldier, Niko. I don't care what type of prison sentence the boy will threaten me with in a star. No more of this.
It isn't easy to follow orders when you don't know what the fuck is going on. I have a feeling that it was best to do what we did, though.
Yeah, but I'm done with this thing, Niko. I'm not go back in a no more blood clot helicopter with that boy there. No more.
Furthermore, he expressed his opinion on the ULP, saying that they are a constant undesired bother for him. Also, more as a thematic fun fact, Jacob even called the mission him and Niko were conducting spy-ish, even though it didn't really have much to do with spying.
Yo, this be some crazy shit, Niko. Yo, we had the star jumps in that helicopter. There's some real spy shit that is doing it up.
But yeah, this one isn't strong enough to consider it an argument. So, summarizing this part, Jacob's presence in the mission Pay Patrol and what he said there is also pretty suspicious. But it also reinforces the theory that Jacob, if he were one at all, wasn't a spy by choice, but was forced into it, and that he didn't quite enjoy it. It's also interesting how the Babylon, as Jacob would say, collected dirt on Niko in the first place. Gravelli said later in the story that they had a file an inch thick on him. And sure, he was watched by Michelle, but as we know from their conversations, Niko never really told Michelle nothing incriminating, and Michelle didn't really find out too much neither. That could have also been why the IAA got Jacob to watch Niko, because Michelle was simply failing, and Jacob definitely wasn't failing. He was the one offering work to Niko. He was the one who stayed close to him and witnessed him being sold out by Dmitry Raskalov, and he thereby gained Niko's trust. Jacob could have been the one to have collected the evidence on Niko, which was later used by Bernard to blackmail him. Also, speaking of Dmitry's betrayal, it always bugged me how Jacob found out about the whole Faustin affair and that Dmitry and Bulgarin were after him.
Alright, my brother. Me and them Russian and seriously vexed with you.
I only pissed off one. He's dead. I'm going to meet Dmitry to collect on the hit.
Yo, Niko, you better watch your back, you know. I know you're wicked, but them boy, them are some dog ass, you know.
I've always just ended up assuming he had good connections, but what if the answer is more concrete? What if he was informed about it by his Babylon bosses, who didn't want Niko to get killed because, as we discussed earlier, they wanted to use him and he was a good way to collect evidence on various criminal organizations in the city? Because, like I said, Jacob was just a small-time shutter. It seems unlikely and always felt kinda off to me that he found out about what Bulgarin, a gangster on a global scale, was planning to do with a barely significant immigrant like Niko. Maybe that was also how he found out that Niko was hired by Elizabeta. Besides, the fact he traced Michelle down in the snowstorm mission would also look very strange if we didn't assume he was in on it. Jacob was supposed to track down a government agent? I mean, Michelle could have wanted to be found, so maybe that makes sense. Anyway, that theory of mine also explains how Jacob acquired info that was, quite frankly, above him. Another aspect I thought of which made Jacob attractive material for a spy was his accent and the dialect he used. The way he spoke was unfamiliar to most of the people in the city he lived at, and to many players too. And paradoxically, that was a big advantage. People didn't only not understand him sometimes, but even if they did, the unfamiliar tone, intonation, vocabulary, grammar, accent, and rhythm made it impossible for most speakers to interpret his statements with the level of nuance they would interpret a speaker of the usual American English. You know, words and grammar is one thing, but from the way we say things, many things can be read: emotion, irony, authenticity, and even the speaker's real thoughts. In Jacob's case, it was highly limited. Niko could not sometimes tell what he talks about, let alone whether he lies, whether he's stressed, whether he's authentic. And there's also an additional layer to all that. Those who've watched my video on Smoke and Tenpenny's operation in GTA SA will remember how I talked about Smoke's poetries. He was talking them for a reason. When he actually accidentally said something off or exposed himself a bit, people like CJ always assumed that it was his weird poetries, which they did not understand. Same with Jacob, and this was even more boosted by his marijuana addiction, which is shown by this cutscene.
Jacob, what are you talking about? You know, I think you're smoking too much.
Yo, me think me know the eater come from in a king.
So to summarize this, here's how I would shape my theory. Jacob got at one point blackmailed by the ULP contact who threatened to charge him with gun trade if he doesn't agree to work for him. Jacob's role was to report and collect evidence on Elizabeta Torres' operation. Later, after he met Niko, he used him as a bridge to Elizabeta and to gain evidence on Niko himself, which was necessary because the ULP wanted to use Belik's skills, and Michelle, who was initially designated to gain evidence on Niko, was failing at her task. Jacob protected Niko through the early stages of the story, including saving him from Bulgarin's wrath, only to then eventually rip off Elizabeta off her coke and make Niko retrieve it and give it up to Michelle, who gave herself away so Jacob could maintain a clean image and avoid exposing his true colors. In the meantime, Jacob was assumingly doing other type jobs for the ULP. Eventually, the ULP had one final job for Niko and Jacob, after which they would both be free. Niko, surely. Jacob, presumably, since he said in the mission that he had enough, regardless of the leverage held against him. They done the mission, shot down that chopper, and Jacob was cut loose. He done well, contributed towards Elizabeta Torres' arrest, he allowed the ULP to use Niko's services and allowed his own services to be used as well. And now, let's quickly list a few counter-arguments which make this theory doubtful. First of them is a little body language detail. When Michelle told Niko that she was a government spy, Jacob still expressed shock through the body language, even though Niko weren't looking. So he didn't have to pretend, yet he did. However, he could pretend. A good actor plays even with the cameras off, and Jacob was a smart brother. He could have kept his play just in case. Another thing is that Jacob was a very loyal, anti-hypocrisy kind of guy. That is greatly shown in Badman's example. Jacob complained at Badman multiple times to Niko. He openly said he didn't like the way Badman operated and the person he was becoming. None of that though made him want to sell him out or cut ties. He would always support him, not out of fear or necessity, but out of pure loyalty. However, the ULP didn't make him collect evidence on Badman, so maybe that wasn't an issue for him. What I mean is that it's just unlikely Jacob would accept to lie to his friends even if it went with bad intentions in the long run, but we'll come back to this aspect in a minute. And the third flaw in my theory is Jacob's philosophy. Jacob was very anti-system and he reasoned his mentality on multiple occasions. That gives a feeling that he would rather go jail than whore for the government. But as we saw in Paper Trail, he did work for them in one way or another surely, so this counter argument is also uncertain. And now something that is really important. How does all that change the perception of Jacob as Niko's friend and as a person in general? And this is the most paradoxical part. An average reaction to that would be an opinion shift from a good, loyal and caring friend to a hypocritical and two-faced liar. However, in my opinion, he's still a good, loyal friend who additionally doesn't operate on extremes but is able to recognize the fine line between falsehood and loyalty. Because look, what was Jacob's choice here? Option A, he could refuse to cooperate, get locked up for a long time and thus be no support for neither Badman, Niko, Roman, no one, and sacrifice his own freedom. Or the option B, he could cooperate in order to bring down a drug baroness whom he found unstable, who wasn't his friend, whom he respected but didn't like. Yes, he would have to keep that in secret because he knew that either Badman, Niko or anyone else would most likely frown upon finding out his true role and would have cut ties just in case. This is one of those situations which is understandable, but people would still not accept it because they can't be sure of your authenticity because of the context. And in all frankness, fair enough, because Jacob also couldn't be sure that a day won't come where the ULP will demand him to snitch on Badman. But he took a risk, and the risk was worth it in the end, because he didn't hurt any of his friends. He lied to them, sure, but didn't hurt them. In fact, his role provided security to Badman's operation presumably, to Niko himself, and helped the latter achieve his goal, so to kill Darko Breivik. Because we all look at Michelle and the ULP contact as bad guys, because that's the connotation we have with them even from other GTAs. They blackmail, make you lie, and attend suicide missions. But really, people like Mike Torino from GTA SA or Bernard the ULP contact were really more of our friends. Sure, they blackmailed us because the protagonist wouldn't trust them just because they represented authority. But they coerced them into deals which were at the end of the day very beneficial for the characters. CJ risked his life and had to lie to his friends, but Torino did eventually free Sweet. Niko risked his life, but Bernard eventually brought Darko Breivik to America for him. Jacob risked his life, potentially lied to his friends, even collected evidence on them. But at the end of the day, he was walking free, Badman stayed out of the pen, and his friend Niko realized his objective. He was never forced to hurt his friend and he remained a loyal friend to Badman, Niko, and Roman, despite his hidden agenda. From the choice between wasting his life in jail and lying, but getting real benefits for himself and his friends in the long run, I think he chose correctly, and I respect the fact that he was ready to hold that in him, if that theory is correct. Because being the kind of person he was, lying to your friends is extremely difficult, even if it means benefits in the long run. So paradoxically, going to jail could have been an easier option for him, surface wise. Jacob went for the harder, more complex, but then more beneficial route. But of course, remember that this is just a theory and it's not a strong one either. This all might as well not be true. It's totally unconfirmed, so keep that in mind. Let me know what you think. Do you buy that theory? And if you were to tell which version speaks to you more, that is, Jacob being completely loyal and never working for the Babylon, or was Jacob actually a spy, as my theory claims? Which one you find more probable? To me, I think I would go for my theory to be slightly more likely, as it explains a few things that I always found absurd in the story. Anyway, remember to like the video if you enjoyed it or found it informative. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and thank you for watching today. Respect.